"Don't spend your money on me," said the enslaved Apache woman, but the rancher took her home. The sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the dry land with soft shades of gold and pink. In a small hidden camp far from the main settlements, a group of Apache people stirred. Among them was a young woman, tall and strong, with dark hair that fell like a curtain over her shoulders. She moved quietly, careful not to wake the others, her eyes sharp and alert. Life in the desert was never easy, and she had learned from a young age how to survive on her own. She knew the paths, the water sources, and how to read the signs of danger long before anyone else could. But today was different. Something in the air felt wrong. The wind carried sounds she had not heard before. Horses' hooves clattering against dry soil, voices calling in a language she did not fully understand. Her heart beat faster. She had seen raids before, and she knew that when strangers came this way, it often ended badly. She quickly gathered her few belongings, wrapping them in a small cloth, and hid them under a pile of rocks. Her mind raced with plans, but deep down she knew she might not have time to escape this time. The strangers appeared on the ridge, a small group of men riding horses. Their clothes were strange to her eyes, their faces hard and unkind. She recognized their intent immediately. They had come to take her people, to steal what they wanted and leave destruction behind. She stayed hidden, heart pounding, watching as the raid began. Screams echoed in the distance, and the sounds of struggle reached her ears. She knew resistance was dangerous, but she also knew she could not just stand by. Before she could decide what to do, one of the men spotted her. His horse reared, and he pointed toward her hiding place. She froze, her instincts screaming for her to run, but there was no time. The men approached quickly, their eyes cold and their hands rough. They did not see her as a person, they saw her as property, an object to be claimed and traded. She could feel the panic rising, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had survived dangers before, and she would survive this one too, somehow. They surrounded her, and she could see the mixture of curiosity and greed in their eyes. She held her head high, refusing to show fear, even though inside she trembled. She said nothing, but her silence spoke louder than words. The leader of the group dismounted and looked at her carefully. He seemed surprised by her defiance. Most people he had taken before had cried or pleaded. But she stood straight, with a fire in her eyes that made him pause. He frowned, unsure what to do next. After a tense moment, they grabbed her and tied her hands gently, not out of kindness, but to prevent her from escaping. She struggled a little, but she knew resistance could make things worse. Her mind raced as they led her toward the horses. She looked back at her camp, at the land she had called home, at the friends and family she might never see again. Tears threatened to spill, but she swallowed them. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The journey to the nearest settlement was long and exhausting. She was placed on a horse behind one of the men, the ropes cutting slightly into her wrists. She rode in silence, staring at the ground, her thoughts a whirlwind. Every now and then she caught glimpses of the desert stretching endlessly, reminding her of freedom, of the life she had been forced to leave behind. She remembered the rivers where she had played as a child, the mountains where she had learned to track animals, and the quiet nights when the stars had been her only companions. Those memories were precious, and she clung to them as tightly as she could. When they arrived at the settlement, the atmosphere changed. People gathered, curious about the new arrival. They whispered among themselves, some approving, others skeptical. She was taken to a small building where deals were made. Her heart sank as she realized she was being sold. She had heard stories of this before, and she had feared this day would come. But nothing could prepare her for the reality of it. She was no longer free. She was considered someone else's possession. A man stepped forward, a rancher from a nearby homestead. He was not like the others. His clothes were simple but clean, and his eyes, while cautious, seemed to look at her differently. He asked questions about her, not about her skills or strength, but about her story, her health, her well-being. She bristled, unsure if she could trust him. She had been taught to be wary of all strangers, especially those who thought they had power over her life. When the price was discussed, she spoke for the first time. Her voice was steady, clear, and strong. "Do not spend your money on me," she said, meeting the rancher's eyes. "I am not an object. I am not something to buy or sell. I do not want anyone to spend money for my life." Her words surprised everyone. They expected silence, compliance, maybe even tears. But she spoke with a courage that had carried her through years of hardship. The rancher was silent for a moment, studying her carefully. He could see the strength in her posture, the intelligence in her gaze, and the fire in her eyes. He understood that she was different, that she was not just another person to be bought and sold. Despite her protests, he decided to take responsibility for her. Not because he wanted ownership, but because he recognized her humanity, her courage, and her dignity. He paid the price and led her to his horse, offering her a choice: to follow him or to remain in the uncertain hands of others. At first, she resisted, shaking her head, insisting again that he had no right to spend his money on her. But he only nodded, respecting her words while gently encouraging her to trust him. Deep down, she felt a flicker of hope, a small but persistent thought that maybe, just maybe, she could survive this journey and find some safety. It was a strange and new feeling, hope mingled with fear, courage paired with uncertainty. As they left the settlement and rode toward his ranch, she kept her eyes on the horizon, scanning the desert with the same alertness she had always carried. The rancher said little, giving her space, understanding that trust could not be demanded, it had to be earned. She noticed small gestures. He made sure she had water, gave her food without comment, and allowed her to rest when the journey became too hard. Each act was small but meaningful, and slowly the wall she had built around herself began to crack just a little. The journey was long, and the nights were cold. She learned to listen to the sounds of the desert at night, to distinguish between harmless creatures and potential threats. The rancher, too, adapted to her knowledge, realizing that her skills and instincts were invaluable. She began to see him not just as a captor, but as someone who could be an ally, a protector, and perhaps even a friend. But she did not allow herself to hope too much, knowing that life on the frontier could change in an instant. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land. The ranch was modest but well kept, surrounded by fields and grazing animals. It smelled of hay and earth, a strange comfort compared to the harshness of the desert. She dismounted carefully, still wary but slightly reassured. The rancher helped her with a gentle hand, showing respect in the simplest ways. She realized that while she was no longer free in the way she had been before, she was not entirely powerless. That night, as she lay on a simple bed in a small room, she thought about the events of the day. She remembered the fear, the struggle, and the courage that had carried her this far. She remembered the rancher's eyes, which had seen her as more than property. And she realized something she had never allowed herself to feel before: a cautious sense of trust, fragile but real, beginning to take root in her heart. The desert outside was quiet, the wind whispering through the trees. She closed her eyes, letting herself breathe for the first time in what felt like forever. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, and perhaps new dangers. But for tonight, she allowed herself a small measure of peace. She was still the same Apache woman, proud, strong, and unbroken. But now, for the first time, she felt the faintest glimmer that maybe survival could mean more than just living. It could mean being seen, being respected, and perhaps, just perhaps. The next morning, the ranch awoke with the soft sounds of life stirring. The horses whinnied in the corral, the chickens clucked as they wandered in the yard, and the sun began to warm the earth. The Apache woman woke slowly, her body stiff from the long journey and the discomfort of a bed that was soft compared to the hard ground she had slept on for years. She sat up, her dark eyes scanning the room, taking in the simple furniture, the wooden walls, and the quiet atmosphere. For a moment she allowed herself to breathe, feeling the unfamiliar comfort that surrounded her. The rancher appeared in the doorway carrying a tray with food, fresh bread, fruit, and a small portion of meat. His expression was careful and respectful. "Eat," he said softly, placing the tray on a low table. "You need strength for the work ahead." She looked at the food, then at him, unsure if she should trust this gesture. Food had often been a tool for control, a way to remind someone they owed their life to another person. But something in the way he waited patiently without forcing her was different. She nodded slowly and began to eat, keeping her movements deliberate and cautious. The rancher did not rush her or speak unnecessarily, allowing her to eat in silence. After a while, he finally spoke again. "You do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said. "But life on a ranch is hard. There is work, and it must be done. I will help you, and I will not ask more than you can give." His words were simple, but they carried a weight of sincerity that she had not expected. She kept her eyes on the bread, chewing carefully, measuring her words. "I do not know your ways," she said slowly. "I have lived in the desert. I know the land in my own way. I do not want to fail you, but I cannot promise anything else." The rancher nodded. "Then you will teach me what you know," he replied. "And I will show you what I can. We will learn from each other." The day passed with small tasks. She helped feed the animals, careful and precise in her movements, and the rancher watched, learning to respect her skill. She had a way with the horses, calming the nervous ones with gentle words and steady hands. The rancher noticed this, admiration in his eyes, but he did not say so aloud. She did not smile, but there was a subtle change in her posture, a recognition that he had noticed her abilities and had not dismissed them. By midday the sun blazed overhead, and they took a brief rest. The Apache woman sat under the shade of a tree, her eyes distant as she thought of her past life. Memories came unbidden, the desert nights, the laughter of her people, the warmth of a fire against the cold. She felt a pang of loss, but it was softened slightly by the awareness that she had survived another day. She had been captured, sold, and forced into a new world, but she had arrived intact, her spirit unbroken. The rancher joined her under the tree, sitting a respectful distance away. He did not speak immediately, simply observing her, as if he understood that silence could be as comforting as words. After a few moments he asked, "Do you miss it?" She looked at him, surprised by the question. "The desert?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yes. I can see it in your eyes." She thought carefully before answering. "I do. It is my home. The desert teaches you strength and patience. It does not forgive carelessness, but it also does not betray you. It is honest in its way." The rancher listened carefully, nodding. "I understand," he said quietly. "I do not know the desert, but I can see that you are strong because of it. That strength will help both of us survive." She did not reply, but she did not turn away either. There was a moment of understanding, a silent acknowledgement that their relationship would not be one of simple ownership or obedience. It would be built on mutual respect, however difficult that might be to achieve. Over the following days, she began to learn the routines of the ranch. She discovered the different animals, how to care for the cattle, how to mend fences, how to preserve food for the harsh days when the sun burned the land and water was scarce. The rancher in turn learned from her knowledge of the land. She taught him which plants were safe to eat, how to find water hidden beneath the soil, and how to move quietly so that no creature would be startled. Slowly they developed a rhythm, each recognizing the skills and knowledge of the other. Yet tension remained. She was not ready to fully trust him, and he did not try to force her. Occasionally she would retreat into silence, refusing to speak or participate in chores, reminding him that she could not be controlled. And occasionally he would face the judgments of neighbors or workers who did not understand why he had taken a captured woman into his home rather than selling her again. He ignored the gossip, focused on the small but significant bond developing between them. One evening a storm rolled across the plains, sending gusts of wind through the ranch and lightning flashing across the darkened sky. They worked together to secure the animals, tying ropes and closing gates, their movements coordinated by necessity. In the shelter of the barn they paused, breathing heavily from the exertion. She looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the flashes of lightning. For the first time she saw not just a man who had bought her freedom from the market, but someone who could be relied upon in moments of danger. She said nothing, but her heart recognized it, even if her voice did not. After the storm passed, They tended the animals and repaired the damage left by the wind. The night was quiet once more, and they sat outside, watching the stars appear, one by one. She had always loved the stars, seeing them as guides and companions. The rancher seemed to understand, sitting silently beside her. He did not speak, respecting the stillness. And in that quiet, a fragile trust began to grow, like a small plant pushing through hard soil, finding sunlight despite the obstacles. Weeks passed, and she slowly adapted to life on the ranch. She never forgot her past, but she began to recognize that survival required more than strength. It required strategy, patience, and, most unexpectedly, cooperation. The rancher continued to respect her wishes, never calling her a servant or demanding more than she could give. His actions spoke louder than words, and slowly, the wall she had built around her heart began to soften, though she would never admit it aloud. Their relationship remained complicated. She tested him constantly, asking questions and challenging his decisions, and he responded with patience, explanation, and occasional firmness. He did not treat her as property, but as a human being capable of choice. The other workers began to notice this as well, and some slowly began to follow his example, treating her with the respect she deserved. Small victories like these mattered deeply to her, affirming her sense of dignity in a world that had long tried to strip it away. One afternoon, while working in the fields, she was approached by a traveler passing through the area. He asked questions about her background, but she remained cautious, answering only what was necessary. The rancher watched from a distance, understanding her instinct to protect herself. After the traveler left, he approached her quietly saying, "You do not have to explain yourself to anyone. Only to me, if you choose." She nodded, acknowledging the words without speaking. It was a promise he did not force, and that mattered to her more than she could say. By the end of the month, the rancher and the Apache woman had developed a fragile partnership. It was not love in the sense she had ever known, nor friendship in the conventional sense, but it was something rare. Mutual respect and understanding forged in the crucible of survival and shared effort. They had begun to see each other not as captor and captive, but as equals navigating a harsh, unpredictable world together. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, she walked to the edge of the ranch and looked out at the desert stretching endlessly before her. Memories of the past surged, but so did a cautious hope for the future. She realized that while the world was full of danger, she had survived. She had survived not just the capture, but the journey, the uncertainty, and the fear. And now, for the first time, she realized that survival could mean more than enduring. It could mean living with dignity, and perhaps even finding a place where she could belong. The rancher approached her silently, standing beside her without speaking. She did not turn to look at him, but she felt his presence as a comfort rather than a threat. Together they watched the desert, two people from different worlds, learning to trust and depend on each other. The journey ahead was uncertain, and danger was never far. But for the first time since her capture, she felt a faint but steady light of hope. It was fragile, delicate, and new, but it was enough. And in that quiet evening, with the desert stretching endlessly before them, and the stars beginning to appear above, the Apache woman understood that she had survived something extraordinary. She had survived not just capture, but the fear of losing herself entirely. And though the road ahead would be difficult, she knew that she had found an ally who recognized her strength, respected her will, and offered her something she had long thought impossible: a chance at a new life, without losing who she truly was. Life at the ranch settled into a rhythm, but it was far from easy. Each day brought new tasks and challenges, and the Apache woman learned quickly that surviving in this place required more than strength. It required patience, sharp eyes, and quick thinking. She woke before dawn each morning, the cold desert air brushing against her skin, and moved quietly to begin the chores. The animals were demanding, the fields tiring, and the sun relentless, but she faced it all with the same resilience that had kept her alive in the desert. The rancher observed her as she worked. He admired her skill and determination, but he also understood that she carried invisible burdens. Her eyes often held a distant sadness, a reflection of a life she could not forget. Sometimes he would speak softly to her, asking questions about her past, trying to understand the woman behind the courage. But she answered sparingly, careful not to reveal too much. She had learned that people could betray trust easily, and she was not yet ready to give it freely. One afternoon, a sudden problem arose. One of the cattle had escaped, and the woman noticed tracks leading toward the edge of the property. She acted quickly, her instincts guiding her as she ran through the dry grass, following the trail. The rancher followed, trying to keep pace, but she was faster, more familiar with the subtle signs the land offered. They caught the cattle before it wandered too far, and for a moment, a sense of accomplishment and relief settled between them. She looked at him, a brief, approving nod, acknowledging his help, and he returned the gesture. It was a small victory, but it mattered. They were learning to work together, relying on each other's strengths. Despite these moments of connection, tension still lingered. She struggled with her feelings about being taken from her people and forced into a life she had not chosen. At times she became withdrawn, refusing to speak or follow instructions, reminding the rancher that she was not yet fully comfortable in this new world. He met her silence with patience, giving her space while remaining vigilant. He knew trust could not be rushed. It had to be earned over time. One day news arrived that disturbed the fragile peace of the ranch. A group of men had been seen near the outskirts of the property, suspiciously close to where the Apache people had once lived. They were strangers, and their intentions were unclear, but the woman's instincts immediately sensed danger. She warned the rancher, her voice sharp and serious.
"They may be looking for me," she said.
"Or for someone else from my people. We must be careful." The rancher listened, recognizing the tension in her tone. He had learned to respect her instincts, which had been honed through years of survival in harsh conditions. Together they prepared for the possibility of confrontation. The rancher reinforced the fences, secured the animals, and made sure everyone on the property understood the need for vigilance. The woman patrolled the boundaries, her senses alert to every sound and movement. The days passed slowly, each one filled with anticipation and unease. They worked side by side, their silent coordination a testament to the growing trust between them. She began to realize that while danger might never fully disappear, she was not alone in facing it. During this time, she also began to notice small changes within herself. The fear that had dominated her life since capture was no longer the only feeling she carried. There was a cautious sense of belonging, a recognition that her skills and knowledge were valued and that she could contribute meaningfully to this new life. It was not the same as the freedom of the desert, but it was something she could work with, something she could shape with her own hands. The rancher noticed these changes too. He saw the way she moved with confidence around the animals, how she handled challenges with calm determination, and how her eyes occasionally softened when she looked at the land. He did not push her to speak or act differently. He simply observed, knowing that her progress was measured in small steps, each one significant.
One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, the rancher invited her to walk with him.
They moved along the edge of the property, the wind carrying the scent of dry grass and earth. "You have taught me much about this land," he said quietly. "I did not know it could offer so much guidance, so many signs. I am grateful for your knowledge." She glanced at him but said nothing, her pride keeping her words in check. Still, a small warmth flickered within her, recognition perhaps that her value was finally being seen. The conversation shifted naturally to her past, though she remained cautious. "I grew up in the desert," she said softly, "learning from the land, from my people. Every day was a lesson, every challenge, a teacher. I survived because I had to, because there was no other choice." The rancher nodded, listening intently, understanding that these words were more than a story. They were a glimpse into the strength that had carried her through every hardship. As they walked, a sudden noise startled them, a branch snapping underfoot. Both turned sharply, their senses alert. The rancher reached for a nearby tool for protection, but the woman held up her hand. "Wait," she whispered, her eyes scanning the area. Her instincts were precise. She moved silently, stepping toward the sound and discovering that it was only a small animal, frightened and fleeing. She smiled faintly, a rare, small expression of amusement. "Not every noise is danger," she said, her tone lighter than usual. The rancher laughed quietly, appreciating the brief moment of relief and the subtle humor she allowed herself to show. Despite these lighter moments, tension returned quickly. One morning, a group of travelers arrived at the ranch, seeking shelter for the night. The woman watched them closely, her eyes wary. She could not forget the way strangers had caused her pain in the past. The rancher, noticing her caution, reassured her. "You do not have to speak if you are uncomfortable," he said. "You can stay where you feel safe." She nodded, grateful for the understanding. The travelers were polite and respectful, and the night passed without incident. But it reminded both of them that the world beyond the ranch was unpredictable, and trust could never be assumed lightly. Over the weeks, the Apache woman began to notice other subtle changes. She was no longer simply surviving, she was learning to adapt. She found satisfaction in the small victories, repairing a fence, calming a skittish horse, or preparing a meal that the rancher praised. These accomplishments, while modest, reinforced her sense of agency. She realized that life on the ranch did not strip her of her identity. It allowed her to exercise it in new ways. The rancher, too, was learning. He had expected obedience, perhaps even gratitude, but he discovered that real partnership required patience, understanding, and humility. He learned to value her insights, to follow her lead when her experience with the land proved more reliable than his own, and to respect her independence even as they worked side by side. Their relationship, once defined by the circumstances of her capture, was evolving into something more equitable, though it remained delicate and tentative. One evening, a fire threatened the edge of the property. Dry winds carried sparks from a distant blaze, and the woman's instincts immediately took over. She alerted the rancher, and together they worked to protect the animals and contain the fire. It was exhausting work, requiring strategy, strength, and careful coordination. The experience further solidified their trust. She saw that he would act decisively to protect her and the land, and he saw that her knowledge and instincts were indispensable. By the time the fire was controlled, both were covered in sweat and ash, but there was a sense of accomplishment that bonded them further. Later, as they rested, she reflected on the changes in herself. She was beginning to trust him, not blindly, but enough to acknowledge that he was not her enemy. She still longed for the desert, for the freedom it represented, but she realized that she could survive in this new world without losing herself entirely. The rancher's presence, steady and reliable, offered a kind of stability she had not known in years. Their partnership was not perfect. Arguments arose over small matters, the care of animals, the best methods for planting, or even the pace of daily chores. She tested his patience, and he tested hers, but each conflict ended in compromise rather than control. Slowly, they built the rhythm that respected both their strengths and limitations. Each challenge they faced together strengthened the fragile trust between them, proving that respect and understanding could grow even in difficult circumstances. By the end of Part 3, it was clear that the Apache woman was no longer just surviving. She was beginning to live in this new world on her own terms. She had adapted to the ranch, gained skills she never thought she would need, and learned to recognize the value in the man who had taken her in. The rancher, in turn, had learned to respect and rely on her in ways that few others had. Together, they had begun to form a bond built on trust, mutual dependence, and the quiet recognition that survival was easier and more meaningful when shared. And while the future remained uncertain, filled with challenges yet unseen, both knew that they had discovered something rare and precious. A partnership grounded not in ownership or obligation, but in respect, trust, and the acknowledgement of each other's strength. It was a beginning, fragile but promising, in a world where every day brought new trials, and every decision carried weight. The days at the ranch had become steady, almost predictable, but peace is often fragile in a world as harsh as the frontier. One morning, the Apache woman noticed something unusual. From her usual lookout on the ridge, she saw dust rising in the distance, a small group of riders approaching, moving quickly and deliberately. Her heart tightened. Years of survival had taught her that strangers on horseback could bring danger, especially to someone like her. She signaled to the rancher who joined her, squinting at the horizon. "They are coming this way," she said, her voice steady but tense. "I do not know who they are, but we must prepare." The rancher nodded immediately, a look of determination crossing his face. He understood her instinctual warnings. She had lived with danger far longer than he had. Together they began to ready the ranch. Gates were closed, animals secured, and tools placed nearby for protection. Every movement was deliberate, a mixture of caution and urgency. As the riders drew closer, it became clear that they were not friendly travelers. Their expressions were hard, their horses trained for speed and aggression. The woman's pulse quickened, but she did not panic. She had survived ambushes and raids before. She knew that fear was dangerous if it controlled her actions. She moved silently among the animals, checking on each one, making sure none were loose. The rancher followed her lead, trusting her instincts even when his own training suggested other measures. When the riders arrived at the edge of the property, the tension was palpable. They demanded to see the rancher, speaking roughly, their intentions unclear at first. The Apache woman observed them quietly from a distance, noting their posture, their weapons, and their every movement. She could feel the danger in the air, sharp and immediate. She wanted to stay hidden, but she knew the rancher needed her support. The rancher approached the group with caution, speaking firmly but politely. "This is my land," he said. "State your business." The men sneered, ignoring his words, but the woman stepped forward, surprising both the rancher and the strangers. "They will not find what they seek here," she said in a calm, confident voice. "Do not threaten this place or you will regret it." Her presence was commanding, her gaze unwavering. The men laughed at first, underestimating her, but the sharpness in her eyes made them pause. A tense standoff followed, the air thick with the possibility of violence. The rancher and the Apache woman stood side by side, silent yet united, their combined strength and resolve clear to the intruders. She spoke only when necessary, her words measured and deliberate, but each one carried authority. Slowly, the men began to realize that this was not a property they could take easily, nor a woman they could intimidate. After hours of tense negotiation, the riders retreated, frustrated by the unexpected resistance. The woman breathed a quiet sigh of relief, but she did not relax completely. Danger on the frontier was never truly gone. It only receded temporarily. The rancher approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You are incredible," he said quietly. "I could not have done it without you." She nodded, acknowledging the compliment without speaking. Pride flickered in her heart, but she quickly pushed it aside. Survival left little room for vanity. In the days that followed, the incident left both of them more aware of the precariousness of their situation. The woman patrolled the boundaries diligently, watching for any signs of further threats. The rancher reinforced the fences and strengthened the defenses, learning from her insights about the land and the movements of people nearby. Their cooperation became more seamless, almost instinctive. Each relied on the other in ways that went beyond survival. They trusted each other's judgment, instinct, and courage. Despite the looming threat, life at the ranch continued. The woman found herself engaging more with daily routines, her skills now essential to the functioning of the property. She could manage the animals with precision, repair fences quickly, and tend the fields with care. Each task she completed reinforced her sense of agency, a reminder that she was more than just a survivor. She was a capable, skilled, and resourceful person in her own right, yet she still grappled with her feelings about freedom. While the ranch offered safety, it was not the open desert she had once known. She often walked along the perimeter, looking out at the horizon, imagining the mountains and rivers of her past. The rancher noticed these moments of reflection but never pressed her. He understood that she could not forget her past, and that forcing her to let go would only breed resentment. His respect for her autonomy was one of the reasons she had begun to trust him, even if only cautiously. One afternoon, a serious accident tested their bond further. A fire broke out in one of the fields, likely caused by dry grass igniting in the afternoon sun. Flames spread quickly, threatening the crops and the animals nearby. The woman acted immediately, her instincts sharp and focused. She ran toward the fire, directing the rancher and any available workers to contain it. Water was carried, fences were repaired on the fly, and the animals were moved to safety. It was exhausting, dangerous work, and the heat and smoke made every breath a struggle. The rancher worked alongside her, admiring her courage and skill. They moved in sync, anticipating each other's actions, covering each other's blind spots. The fire forced them to rely on one another completely, without hesitation. By nightfall, the flames were contained, and the damage minimized, thanks largely to their combined effort. As they sat together, covered in soot and sweat, the woman realized something profound. She trusted him not just to protect her, but to act with reason and courage under pressure. That trust had taken months to build, and now it had been tested in the most demanding way possible. After the fire, the rancher spoke quietly. "You are stronger than I imagined," he said. "Not just in skill, but in spirit. I am glad you are here with me." The woman nodded, feeling a flicker of emotion she had long suppressed. She did not speak immediately, but in her heart she acknowledged the bond that had grown between them. It was not a bond of ownership, obligation, or pity. It was a bond forged through shared danger, mutual respect, and recognition of each other's strength. As the weeks passed, the woman continued to assert her independence while remaining an integral part of the ranch. She learned to manage her responsibilities efficiently, and the rancher increasingly relied on her judgment. At the same time, he continued to protect her, making decisions that ensured her safety without infringing on her autonomy. Their relationship was a delicate balance of power, trust, and respect, built carefully over time and tested through every challenge. However, the calm was not permanent. News reached them that a larger group of people, mercenaries known for raiding settlements, was moving through the area. The woman's instincts told her that this would be a far greater threat than the previous riders. She warned the rancher, her voice tense but steady. "They are organized. They will not leave without taking what they want. We must prepare." He listened carefully, his respect for her experience evident in his immediate response. Together, they made plans to protect the ranch, the animals, and each other. The days leading up to the arrival of the mercenaries were filled with preparation. Fences were strengthened, watch points were established, and every tool and resource was accounted for. The woman taught the rancher techniques she had learned in the desert, how to move quietly, how to detect signs of intrusion, and how to use the land to their advantage. For the first time, he realized that her skills went far beyond survival. They were essential for the protection and management of the ranch itself. When the mercenaries finally arrived, the rancher and the Apache woman faced them together. The confrontation was tense, and every decision mattered. The woman's insights allowed them to anticipate the mercenaries' movements, giving them the upper hand. The rancher acted decisively, but he relied on her guidance in critical moments. Together, they protected the ranch without unnecessary violence, using strategy and quick thinking to outmaneuver the intruders. After the threat passed, the woman allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She had faced danger repeatedly in her life, but this time she had not been alone. She had someone who respected her, relied on her, and acted alongside her as an equal. The realization was powerful, though she did not voice it aloud. Instead, she returned to her duties, silently acknowledging the strength of the partnership they had forged through fire, danger, and trust. By the end of Part 4, it was clear that the Apache woman and the rancher had developed a deep, unspoken understanding. Their relationship was no longer defined by circumstance or necessity. It had become a partnership built on mutual respect, shared experience, and the recognition of each other's strength and wisdom. The world outside the ranch remained unpredictable and dangerous, but within its boundaries, they had found a fragile but resilient sense of security. And while the future remained uncertain, filled with challenges yet unseen, both knew that they had discovered something rare and invaluable, a bond grounded not in fear or obligation, but in respect, trust, and the acknowledgement of each other's courage. It was a beginning, fragile but promising, in a world where every day carried risk, and every decision could mean the difference between life and death. The days after the mercenaries had left were quiet, but the calm felt different. It was no longer the uncertain quiet of a world full of threats. It was a quiet that comes after survival, after danger has been faced together and overcome. The Apache woman moved through the ranch with a sense of confidence she had never known before. Every step, every action carried the weight of experience, skill, and newly earned trust. She had survived raids, capture, and hardship, but now she faced a different kind of challenge, living a life that allowed her to feel more than fear, to trust more than herself, and to hope more than she had thought possible. The rancher observed her silently, noting the changes in her posture, the way she moved with calm assurance, and the subtle ease with which she interacted with the animals in the land. He could see that she had not lost the strength that had carried her through years of struggle. Instead, it had evolved into something more refined, tempered by careful thought and experience. He admired her quietly, knowing that their relationship had shifted from necessity to something deeper, an understanding built on mutual respect, shared danger, and unwavering courage. One morning she walked to the edge of the property where the desert stretched endlessly beyond the fences. She paused to look at the horizon, feeling the wind brush her face, and memories of her old life returned vividly. The mountains of her childhood, the rivers she had known, the nights under endless stars, all of it flooded her mind. She felt a pang of longing, but it was not bitter. She realized that while the desert would always be a part of her, it no longer defined her entirely. She had a place here now, not one she had chosen, but one she could shape with her own hands. The rancher joined her, standing quietly beside her. He did not speak immediately, understanding that she needed the space to process her thoughts. After a moment he said softly, "You have survived much. I cannot imagine the strength it has taken."
I am honored that you are here. She glanced at him, meeting his gaze briefly before looking back at the horizon.
"I have survived because I had to," she said finally. "But I am learning that surviving is not enough. One must also live, even when it is difficult." His eyes softened. "And living is easier when shared," he replied. She did not answer, but she allowed herself a faint, almost imperceptible nod. Life at the ranch gradually returned to a rhythm that was both familiar and new. The animals were tended with care, the fields managed efficiently, and the home maintained with quiet diligence. The Apache woman had become essential to the operation, not out of obligation, but because of her skill, insight, and dedication. The rancher continued to rely on her judgment, asking for her opinion on matters both large and small. Their partnership, once fragile and cautious, had grown strong and balanced, rooted in mutual trust and respect rather than necessity or fear. Yet, despite this newfound stability, both knew that the world beyond the ranch remained unpredictable. Threats could appear at any time, and life on the frontier was never truly safe. The woman often walked along the edges of the property, observing the landscape, listening to the wind, and remembering the lessons of her past. She remained vigilant, aware that survival required both skill and awareness. But she also allowed herself moments of peace, moments where the sun on her face and the quiet of the desert reminded her that she had found a place where she could breathe without constant fear. The rancher noticed these changes and respected them. He understood that she could not abandon her instincts or forget her past, and he did not ask her to do so. Instead, he offered stability, guidance, and partnership. He continued to protect her when necessary, but he also allowed her independence, recognizing that true strength comes from the ability to act freely, not from control over others. Their relationship had evolved into one of balance, where each respected the other's strengths, limitations, and autonomy. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of fence together, a subtle but profound shift occurred. The woman realized that she was no longer constantly calculating, no longer perpetually alert to danger. She could allow herself to notice the sun warming her face, the sound of birds in the trees, and the quiet rustle of the wind through the grass. These small pleasures, once impossible to enjoy, had become part of her daily life. She glanced at the rancher, noticing his focus and care, and felt a quiet gratitude. She did not speak, but the feeling was real and deep. The rancher, too, noticed the shift. He saw that she was no longer merely surviving, that she was beginning to live in a more complete sense. Her eyes, once guarded and distant, now held a quiet confidence and a subtle ease that reflected both her resilience and the bond they had built. He felt a deep respect for her, not as a protector or a superior, but as a partner and an equal in every sense that mattered. Their shared experiences had forged a connection that transcended words, a connection grounded in understanding, respect, and recognition of each other's strength. As the sun set one evening, casting long shadows across the land, the woman walked to the ridge overlooking the ranch. She felt a sense of completion, a quiet acknowledgement of everything she had endured and accomplished. The rancher joined her, and together they watched the desert glow in shades of gold and crimson. In that moment, words were unnecessary. The silence between them carried meaning, the understanding that they had faced danger together, survived together, and built a life together that neither could have imagined alone. She thought of her people, her past, and the life she had lost, but she did not feel despair. Instead, she felt a sense of continuity, as if the lessons of the desert and the struggles she had faced had prepared her for this new chapter. She realized that survival had always been about more than endurance. It had been about learning, adapting, and finding the strength to face the unknown with courage. And now she had found someone who understood that, someone who could be trusted, and someone who valued her not as property, but as a person. The rancher spoke quietly, breaking the silence. "We have faced many challenges," he said, "but I believe we can face whatever comes next, together." She turned to him, considering his words. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to believe it. Not because danger had disappeared, but because she had someone by her side she could trust, someone who recognized her strength and respected her choices. She nodded slowly, the faintest smile appearing on her face. In the weeks that followed, the ranch became a place of stability and growth. The Apache woman continued to manage her responsibilities, teaching the rancher and others about the land, animals, and survival techniques. She found satisfaction in her work and a quiet pride in the recognition she received. The rancher, in turn, continued to protect and support her, allowing her independence while offering guidance when needed. Their partnership flourished, based on trust, respect, and mutual recognition of each other's strengths. One evening, as the stars appeared above the desert, the woman sat quietly outside reflecting on her journey. She had been captured, forced into a life she had not chosen, and faced countless dangers. Yet, through it all, she had survived, adapted, and grown stronger. She realized that her life had transformed in ways she could not have imagined. She had found safety, trust, and partnership, and she had maintained her dignity and independence throughout. The rancher joined her, sitting beside her without speaking. They looked up at the stars together, sharing the quiet, the beauty, and the sense of accomplishment that comes after enduring great hardship. In that moment they understood each other fully, not through words, but through shared experience, mutual respect, and the acknowledgement of each other's strength and courage. As the night deepened, the Apache woman allowed herself a rare sense of peace. She had faced the worst the world could offer and emerged intact, not just surviving, but living. She had found a place where she could contribute, be respected, and build a future even if it was different from the one she had imagined. And most importantly, she had found someone who saw her as a person, who valued her, and who could be trusted in a way she had not thought possible. The rancher, sitting quietly beside her, felt the same sense of completion. Their journey together had been difficult, filled with danger, uncertainty, and challenges, but it also revealed the strength, courage, and resilience of the Apache woman. He understood that he had been changed by her presence, learning to respect, trust, and value her as an equal. Together, they had forged a bond that could withstand the trials of the frontier, a bond built on shared experience, respect, and recognition of each other's worth. By the time the first light of dawn touched the desert, both the Apache woman and the rancher felt a quiet certainty. They had survived, they had adapted, and they had built a life together that was meaningful, respectful, and grounded in mutual trust. The future remained uncertain, as the frontier was always unpredictable, but they faced it together, stronger and wiser for everything they had endured. The Apache woman who had once believed that survival meant isolation, fear, and constant vigilance, now understood that strength could also come from partnership, trust, and shared courage. She had been tested, challenged, and shaped by her experiences, and she had emerged not broken, but whole. The rancher, who had once seen her as someone to protect, now saw her as an equal, a partner, and a person whose wisdom, skill, and courage were invaluable. And so, life at the ranch continued, filled with work, learning, and quiet moments of reflection. The Apache woman moved through her days with skill and confidence, while the rancher continued to act with respect and care. Their bond, forged through hardship, danger, and mutual reliance, remained unspoken but undeniable. Together, they had found something rare and enduring: trust, respect, and a partnership that allowed them both to live fully, even in a world filled with uncertainty. In the end, the Apache woman realized that she had not only survived her past, but had also created a future. A future where she could live with dignity, contribute meaningfully, and trust another human being. A future where she could face the challenges of the world not alone but alongside someone who valued her courage, respected her choices, and stood with her in every storm. And that realization, quiet and profound, was more powerful than any hardship she had endured.